The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a scream, or a shattered window, or the wail of sirens cutting through the early morning air. It was the silence. On West 112th Street, silence was unusual. Even at dawn, New York hummed, delivery trucks groaned at curbs, subway grates exhaled warm breath, someone always argued with someone else. But that Tuesday morning, just after 6:30 a.m., the brownstone at number 418 sat in a stillness so complete it felt deliberate, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Across the street, Margaret Doyle paused mid-step with her dog's leash clenched in her hand. She had lived there for 23 years and prided herself on noticing patterns. And this was not right. The lights in the Carter family's living room were still on. They were always the first to turn them off. Daniel Carter, 46, was a man of habits. Coffee at 6 a.m. sharp. Lights off by 6:15. Door locked by 6:20. His wife, Rebecca, 42, teased him about it often, calling him a walking checklist. Their children, Emily, 21, and Lucas, 19, were newer variables in the routine, but even they followed the unspoken rules of the house. By now, the light should have been dark. The front door should have opened and closed at least once. Someone should have emerged. No one did. Margaret stood there longer than she meant to. Her dog tugged impatiently, nails clicking against the pavement. She told herself it was nothing. A late night. A sick day. A harmless deviation. But the house watched her back. By noon, the silence had grown heavier. Packages piled near the front steps, 2, then 3. A grocery delivery van idled briefly, the driver knocking twice before shrugging and leaving a bag behind. By mid-afternoon, the bag had begun to sweat in the sun, milk warming, ice cream surrendering. Still, no movement. The call came in at 4:47 p.m. A welfare check. Nothing urgent, just a concerned neighbor. When Officers Klein and Martinez arrived, they expected annoyance more than alarm. A family asleep. Maybe out of town. People overreacted all the time. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Nothing. Officer Klein tried the door. It opened. That was the moment the case truly began. The air inside was stale, tinged with the faint smell of brewed coffee and something sweeter, vanilla, perhaps, from a candle still melted low in its glass jar. The living room lights glowed softly, casting long shadows across furniture that looked untouched, perfectly arranged, as if staged. A mug sat on the kitchen counter. Still half full. Cold now. A phone lay face down beside it. Keys hung neatly on their hook. There were no signs of a struggle. No overturned chairs. No broken glass. No blood. Not even a sense of panic. It was as if the family had simply stood up midlife and stepped out of existence. Officer Martinez checked the bedrooms first. Daniel and Rebecca's bed was made. Taut, crisp, hotel perfect. Emily's room showed a half-open laptop on her desk, a research paper still pulled up on the screen. Lucas's sneakers were by the door, lined up with military precision. His wallet rested on the dresser, cash still inside. Passports were in the drawer. Phones were everywhere, 4 of them, none missing. Officer Klein radioed in, his voice lower than before. "This is strange." By evening, the brownstone was flooded with uniforms. Detectives arrived. Then supervisors. Then crime scene technicians who moved carefully, methodically, growing more unsettled with every untouched surface. There were no fingerprints out of place. No forced entry. No missing valuables. Not even a note. Detective Aaron Blake stood in the doorway longer than most. 49, sharp-eyed, and notoriously difficult to rattle, he had seen enough chaos in his career to recognize when something was wrong in a way that didn't fit. "This house doesn't feel robbed," he said quietly. "It feels paused." He walked through slowly, noting the details others might dismiss. The calendar on the fridge had a red circle around Friday. A reminder written in Rebecca's careful handwriting, dinner. Dinner for whom? In the living room, the television was paused mid-frame. A news anchor frozen mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes wide. The timestamp showed 8:14 p.m. The night before. Blake frowned. Families didn't vanish like this. Not without noise. Not without panic. Not without mistakes. Outside, neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, pointing, speculating. Phones came out. Photos were taken. By nightfall, the first rumors had already begun to crawl across social media. Cult. Witness protection. Debt. Abduction. Inside the brownstone, the house offered no answers. But it was watching. And somewhere, unknown to everyone standing on that quiet New York street, something had already been recorded. By the time the sun dipped behind the buildings lining West 112th Street, the Carter house was no longer just a home, it was a sealed question mark. Yellow tape stretched across the front steps like a warning no one could ignore. Patrol cars idled nearby, their lights washing the brick facade in restless blue and red, a pulse of urgency where calm had lived for years. Detective Aaron Blake stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, watching neighbors pretend not to stare. They always did that, look away just long enough to convince themselves they weren't afraid. Blake knew better. Fear thrived on uncertainty, and this case had already begun to rot from the inside. Inside the house, the forensic team moved with quiet precision. Every surface was photographed. Every room logged. Every object treated as if it might suddenly explain itself. It didn't. "No blood," said forensic technician Lorichin, crouched near the kitchen sink. "Not a drop. Not even traces." Blake nodded, his jaw tight. Blood could be cleaned, but never perfectly. It always left something behind, microscopic protests against disappearance. This house was spotless in a way that felt intentional, but not staged. "Any sign of struggle?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied. "No broken nails. No scuffed floors. Furniture hasn't been moved in days." That answer disturbed him more than if she had said the opposite. Daniel Carter's office was next. The desk was immaculate, papers stacked, pen aligned parallel to the edge. A man who controlled his world through order. Blake opened drawers slowly, careful not to disturb what felt like a fragile illusion. Financial records. Nothing alarming. No sudden withdrawals. No debts worth mentioning. No recent large transactions. The kind of financial life that didn't usually precede a disappearance. Rebecca's planner told a similar story. Appointments scheduled weeks into the future. A dental checkup. A lunch with a friend. Grocery reminders. People who planned didn't tend to vanish. "Detective," Officer Martinez called from the hallway. "You need to see this." Blake followed him into the living room. The television screen still glowed faintly, frozen on the same paused news broadcast. "We checked the DVR," Martinez said. "The system stopped recording at 8:14 p.m. last night." "And after that?" "Nothing. No shutdown, no power outage. It just stopped." Blake exhaled slowly. "Any neighbors hear anything?" Martinez shook his head. "That's the strange part. Not a sound. No arguing. No alarms. No footsteps. One neighbor says she heard a car door late last night, but that's it. In this city, that's background noise. Blake glanced around the room again. The couch pillows were still fluffed. A throw blanket folded neatly along the armrest. 4 plates sat drying in the rack beside the sink. 4. Looks like they had dinner, he murmured. Food delivery? Martinez asked. No receipts. No containers. Someone cooked. Blake imagined the scene. The family seated around the table. A conversation. Laughter, maybe. Or tension, hidden beneath normalcy. He had learned long ago that most disasters didn't announce themselves. They blended in. By 9:30 p.m., the initial walkthrough was complete. The conclusion, however, was anything but. They didn't leave voluntarily, Blake said to the small group gathered in the dining room. Not like this. Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow. No forced entry. No note. No signs of violence. You're saying 4 adults just vanished against their will? I'm saying they didn't pack. They didn't take essentials. They didn't prepare. And there's no evidence of anyone else entering or leaving. Not yet, Blake replied. Reynolds frowned. Then what are we dealing with? Blake didn't answer immediately. He hated guessing. But silence felt dishonest. A controlled event, he said finally. Something quiet. Something that didn't trigger fear right away. Like what? Blake looked at the paused television again. The anchor's frozen expression seemed almost mocking now. Like trust. As the night deepened, the house grew louder in its stillness. Floors creaked softly as investigators passed. Radios crackled. Gloves snapped. But the Carters remained absent, leaving behind lives that felt unfinished. Down the block, reporters had begun to arrive. Microphones appeared. Camera lights flared. Questions flew faster than answers could keep up. Inside, Blake stepped into Emily's room again. He studied the open laptop more closely. The cursor blinked patiently at the end of a paragraph. No farewell message. No saved draft confessing fear. He closed the laptop gently. In Lucas's room, a poster peeled slightly from the wall, a sports team, long out of fashion. On the nightstand, his phone buzzed softly. A message notification. Blake lifted it carefully. Yo, you coming tomorrow or what? No response sent. Time moved on without them. At midnight, Blake stood in the doorway once more, surveying the house that had become the center of a growing storm. 4 people gone. No blood. No noise. No goodbye. And somewhere in the city's endless network of cameras, the truth was waiting, patient, silent, and ready to unravel everything they thought they understood. By the 3rd day, the Carter family had become a story. Not a case, not yet. A story. The kind New York devoured whole and asked for seconds. Their faces stared out from screens in bodegas and subway stations, printed on flyers taped to lampposts and bus stops. Have you seen them? Asked the bold black letters beneath 4 smiling photographs that felt suddenly dishonest. Detective Aaron Blake hated that part. Stories flattened people. They turned complex lives into headlines and reduced private flaws to public speculation. But he also knew something else: stories invited witnesses. And witnesses were often careless with the truth. The task force expanded quickly. Missing persons, financial crimes, digital forensics. Everyone wanted a piece of the silence left behind. Blake started where silence often cracked first: people. Rebecca Carter's closest friend was Claire Holloway, 44, a marketing executive who lived 3 blocks away. She arrived at the precinct wearing oversized sunglasses despite the gray morning, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup she hadn't touched. She would never just leave, Claire said, voice sharp with certainty. Rebecca loved structure. She loved knowing what came next. Did she mention any problems? Blake asked gently. Anything unusual? Claire hesitated. Just long enough to be noticed. She was tired, she said. That's all. We all are. Blake didn't push yet. Hesitation was a door that opened better when left alone. Daniel Carter's coworkers painted him as dependable to the point of predictability. A mid-level operations manager with no enemies, no affairs, at least none they admitted to knowing. He didn't gamble. Didn't drink much. Didn't make waves. He kept his head down, one colleague said. Almost too much. Blake wrote that down. Emily's university friends described her as driven, brilliant, and increasingly private. She had recently withdrawn from a student organization she'd once led. When asked why, her roommate shrugged. She said it was time to focus on what mattered. What did she mean by that? Blake asked. The roommate frowned. I don't know. She didn't explain. Lucas's circle was smaller. 2 close friends. One girlfriend, Maya Trent, 20, who arrived with red eyes and a voice that shook when she spoke. He was excited about something, Maya said. Nervous, too. Did he say what? Blake asked. No. Just that everything was about to change. Blake leaned back slightly. Did you believe him? Maya hesitated. Another pause. I thought he meant school. Or his family. I didn't think, her voice broke. I didn't think this. Patterns began to emerge, faint but undeniable. Tired. Focused. Changing. Quiet. Not words that screamed danger, but words that whispered it. By afternoon, the digital unit had compiled preliminary findings. Phones, laptops, tablets, all scrubbed clean of anything immediately alarming. No searches about disappearing. No emails hinting at fear. Social media activity had tapered off weeks before the disappearance, not abruptly but gradually, like a curtain lowering. That's deliberate, said analyst Kevin Morales. People usually ramp up before they vanish. This is the opposite. Like they were pulling away, Blake said. Or being careful, Morales replied. The Financial Review was equally puzzling. No suspicious withdrawals. No new accounts. No signs of fraud. But one detail caught Blake's attention. There's a shell consulting firm, Morales said, tapping the screen. Minimal activity. Daniel's name appears on the registration, but it's inactive. No income. Why register it at all? Blake asked. Morales shrugged. Could be nothing. Or it could be preparation. Preparation for what? By evening, the media narrative had begun to harden. Perfect family vanishes. The phrase made Blake grimace. Perfect families didn't exist. And that label was dangerous. It invited disbelief, backlash, envy. It dared the public to uncover rot beneath the polish. They didn't have to wait long. An anonymous tip came in just before 8 p.m. The caller refused to give a name, but the voice was steady, confident. You should look into Rebecca Carter's volunteer work, the caller said. She wasn't just helping people. What do you mean? Blake asked. A pause. Then, she was being watched. The line went dead. Blake stood there for a moment, phone still in hand. Volunteer work. Rebecca had been listed as a mentor at a community reintegration program, helping formerly incarcerated individuals find employment. Admirable. Selfless. Potentially dangerous. He ordered the files immediately. What he found wasn't illegal. But it wasn't harmless either. Rebecca had taken a special interest in one participant, Marcus Hale, 32. Multiple meetings. Long email exchanges. Phone calls late at night. Blake leaned back in his chair. People always assumed danger came from the outside, from strangers, from shadows. But sometimes it arrived wearing gratitude and a carefully practiced smile. Still, something didn't add up. If Marcus was involved, why take everyone? Why leave no trace? And why had Emily and Lucas both seemed to sense an approaching change? Blake returned to the caseboard, pinning photos, notes, timelines. The Carters weren't victims of randomness. They were part of something unfolding slowly, deliberately. Something they may have agreed to. Or something they were running from. Either way, the family everyone thought they knew was beginning to disappear a second time, this time, in plain sight. Detective Aaron Blake had learned to respect what people forgot. They forgot receipts, passwords, alibis. They forgot lies they told months earlier. And most dangerously, they forgot cameras, silent witnesses mounted so high or hidden so well they faded into the background of everyday life. The Carter house had been combed twice already. Every obvious angle documented. Doorbell camera, offline. Street-facing security cam across the road, grainy, incomplete. Traffic cameras along West 112th, nothing unusual within the estimated window. The case had stalled in that unsettling space between effort and progress. Then a junior tech named Lila Monroe hesitated during a routine review. "Detective Blake," she said, leaning back from her monitor. "Can I show you something?" "It's not standard." Blake followed her into the digital lab, where screens glowed with hours of uneventful footage, people walking dogs, cars double parking, nothing worth remembering. Lila pulled up a schematic of the Carter property. "There's a private alley behind the block," she said. "Technically city-owned, but rarely used. Sanitation doesn't even pass through." Blake nodded. He knew it. A narrow strip of shadow most residents pretended didn't exist. "There's a small commercial building at the end," she continued. "An HVAC contractor. They installed a security system last year." She clicked. The screen filled with footage timestamped the night of the disappearance. 8:06 p.m. The alley was empty. Damp pavement reflected a dim security light. Trash bags sat undisturbed. 8:12 p.m. A shape moved at the edge of the frame. Blake leaned in. At first, it looked like nothing, a shadow stretching unnaturally long. Then a figure stepped fully into view. A man. Average height. Baseball cap pulled low. Hands in pockets. He stopped. And waited. Blake's pulse slowed, sharpened. "Enhance," he said. Lila adjusted the contrast. The man's face remained obscured, but his posture was unmistakable, relaxed, patient. "He's there for 12 minutes, she said quietly. "What's he doing?" Blake asked. "Nothing." At 8:24 p.m., the alley light flickered. The man shifted his weight. Then, something else happened. The back door of the Carter house opened. Blake felt the room tighten. Rebecca Carter stepped out first. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't running. She wore a coat, her hair neatly pulled back. Behind her came Daniel. Then Emily. Then Lucas. Four silhouettes moving calmly into the alley, like guests leaving a dinner party. No restraints. No visible weapons. No hesitation. Blake's jaw tightened. They're not being forced. Lila swallowed. Watch closer. As the family approached the man, he stepped forward. He raised one hand, not threatening, not rushed. A greeting. Rebecca nodded. A gesture of recognition. The timestamp rolled forward. At 8:27 p.m., a van pulled into the alley. Dark. Unmarked. Its headlights remained off. The side door slid open. The family entered. One by one. The man in the cap closed the door himself. He didn't follow them in. Instead, he stood there for a moment, looking toward the house. Toward the life they were leaving behind. Then he walked away. Silence filled the lab. Blake exhaled slowly, the weight of it pressing against his ribs. They knew him, he said. Yes, Lila replied. And that's not all. She pulled up another clip. A different camera. Same alley. Same night. Earlier. 7:48 p.m. Emily stood alone near the back door, phone pressed to her ear. She paced, tense, her free hand twisting the sleeve of her jacket. She nodded several times. Then she said something. The audio was unavailable, but Blake could read lips well enough. Are you sure? Cut to 7:55 p.m. Lucas joined her. He looked angry. Not panicked, angry. He gestured sharply toward the house. Emily shook her head. She touched his arm. A plea. By 8:01 p.m., Daniel appeared. He placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. Firm. Final. Rebecca followed last. She closed the door behind them. Blake straightened slowly. This wasn't an abduction, he said. Lila nodded. It looks like an arrangement. Blake's mind raced. Every interview replayed itself. Everything is about to change. Focused on what mattered. Tired. This wasn't chaos. This was consent, or something dangerously close to it. But consent to what? The man in the cap had been careful. He never faced the camera directly. He parked where license plates wouldn't be visible. He left no trace behind. Professional. Blake requested facial recognition anyway. No immediate matches. The van? Stolen 3 weeks earlier. Abandoned in Queens the next morning. Clean. Whoever planned this had planned well. Too well. Blake leaned back, staring at the frozen image of Rebecca stepping into the van. Her posture haunted him. Not fear. Resolve. Or resignation. The public would devour this footage if it ever leaked. A family walking willingly into darkness. Questions would erupt. Were they coerced? Brainwashed? Paid? Or were they running, from debt, from danger, from something far worse? Blake closed the file. One thing was now undeniable. The Carters hadn't vanished without a trace. They had left one behind. And it was watching them leave. By the 5th day, the case had split cleanly in two. There was the story the public believed, a family lured, manipulated, perhaps coerced into disappearing by a shadowy figure. And then there was the version Detective Aaron Blake couldn't ignore, a timeline stitched together with calm decisions, rehearsed movements, and moments that suggested argument rather than fear. The CCTV footage changed everything, but it also created a more dangerous problem. If the Carters walked away willingly, the law treated them differently. Adults had the right to disappear, unless a crime had been committed. Blake stood before the timeline board, red string crisscrossing photographs, timestamps, and handwritten notes. He stared at the hours before 8:27 p.m., the moment the van door closed. Something was missing. "Let's start earlier," Blake said to the task force. "Way earlier." They went back 48 hours. Rebecca Carter left work at 5:41 p.m. the day before the disappearance. Traffic camera confirmed it. She stopped at a pharmacy, then a bookstore. Normal purchases. No urgency. Daniel clocked out at 6:03 p.m. He took the subway home. No deviations. His phone pinged cell towers consistently. Emily attended her afternoon lecture. Lucas went to the gym. Ordinary. Too ordinary. Blake circled a timestamp on the board, Sunday, 3:17 p.m. "What happened here?" he asked. Morales glanced at his tablet. All 4 phones were powered off at the same time. 4:23 minutes. "That's not coincidence," Blake said. "No," Morales agreed. "And it only happened once. Phones didn't die simultaneously unless someone wanted them to." They traced the location. Central Park. Near a maintenance access area closed to the public. Blake frowned. "Why meet there?" "No cameras," Morales replied. "At least none that face inward. A family meeting, off-grid." At 3:40 p.m., all phones powered back on. No messages sent. No calls made. Silence. Blake moved to another anomaly. "Emily withdrew cash," he said. "Small amount. $200. Friday afternoon. And Daniel withdrew $300 Saturday morning," Morales added. "Rebecca didn't withdraw anything. Why split it?" Blake asked. "Because it looks less suspicious," Morales said quietly. Blake nodded. People planning to vanish never made one big move. They made dozens of small ones. But then came the contradiction. "They left valuables," Blake said, tapping the photo of Rebecca's jewelry box. "Watches. Heirlooms. Cash. Which suggests they didn't think they'd need money," Morales said. "Or they already had it." Morales pulled up a new file. "There's something else," he said. "That shell consulting firm Daniel registered. It wasn't inactive. It was dormant." Blake's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "It received one deposit. 6 months ago. $50,000. Then nothing." Blake stared at the number. "Source?" Morales hesitated. "Private trust. Routed through 2 intermediaries. Legal. Clean." Blake felt a chill. $50,000 was enough to start over quietly, but not enough to vanish forever. Unless it was just a down payment. "What about Rebecca's volunteer contact?" Blake asked. "Marcus Hale." Morales exhaled. "That's where it gets complicated. Marcus Hale had disappeared too. Not the same night. 2 days earlier. No report filed. No alarms raised. He lived alone. No close family. But his phone last pinged less than a mile from the Carter home." Blake rubbed his temples. "So we have a family planning something carefully, meeting off camera, receiving money, and aligning their disappearance with another missing adult connected to the mother. Yes. And we have CCTV showing calm cooperation, but tension beforehand. Yes. Blake stepped back, scanning the board. Where does fear fit into this? He asked quietly. No one answered. The argument footage replayed in his mind, Lucas's anger, Emily's pleading, Daniel's firm hand on his son's shoulder. A decision had been made. Not unanimously. Find the fracture, Blake said suddenly. The what? Morales asked. The fracture point. The moment they stopped being a family and became participants. Morales scrolled. There was an email, he said. Drafted by Rebecca. Never sent. Blake looked up. What does it say? Morales hesitated. It's vague. He read aloud. If we don't do this now, it will follow us forever. I won't let that happen. I need you to trust me. Blake felt his stomach tighten. That's not persuasion, he said. That's ultimatum. Or protection, Morales replied. Blake wasn't convinced. Protection didn't require secrecy from your own children. Later that night, Blake returned to the CCTV footage one last time. He slowed it down, frame by frame. Rebecca paused just before stepping into the van. She looked back. Not at the man. At the house. Her shoulders dropped, not with relief, but with surrender. Blake shut off the screen. The timeline didn't add up because it wasn't built around fear or greed. It was built around leverage. Someone had given the Carters a choice. And they had taken the only one they believed they had. The breakthrough didn't arrive with drama. No alarms. No sudden confession. Just a file mislabeled, buried beneath layers of benign paperwork, waiting for someone patient enough, or suspicious enough, to look twice. Detective Aaron Blake found it at 2:13 a.m. He had been alone in his office for hours, the precinct long since quieted into the low hum of machines and distant traffic. The Carter case board loomed in front of him, crowded now, yet still missing its center. Leverage, he thought again. Someone had leverage over the Carters. Not fear of violence, fear of exposure. Blake reopened Rebecca Carter's volunteer records, this time ignoring the program summaries and focusing on attachments. Forms. Logs. Notes written in margins. One document stopped him cold. A confidential incident report, never submitted. Rebecca had written it herself. The date was 9 months earlier. Blake read slowly. Participant disclosed involvement in an unreported fatal incident. Claimed self-defense. No witnesses. No official record. Expressed fear of retaliation and exposure. Blake's pulse quickened. Marcus Hale. Rebecca hadn't just been mentoring him. She had been carrying his secret. Marcus had killed someone. Not recently. Not loudly. Quietly enough that no one came looking, yet. Blake leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Rebecca hadn't reported it. Hadn't escalated it. Hadn't told authorities. Instead, she had documented it privately. Why? The next page answered that question. Participant insists incident was connected to employer's illegal activities. Claims victim was attempting to silence him. Provided partial names and locations. No evidence supplied. Blake exhaled sharply. Marcus hadn't just killed someone. He had knowledge. Knowledge tied to illegal operations. Employers. Names. Locations. And Rebecca had kept it. That alone was career-ending. But the next line turned it into something far worse. Daniel is aware. Blake sat upright. Daniel knew. The husband. The orderly man. The checklist. The report continued. Decision made to protect family. Awaiting further instruction. Instruction from whom? Blake dug deeper. Emails surfaced, encrypted, sparse, carefully worded. No threats. No demands. Just confirmations. We are prepared to assist with relocation. Terms remain unchanged. All parties must comply. The sender's address routed through multiple servers. Untraceable. Blake's mouth went dry. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was containment. Marcus Hale had been a liability. A loose end with knowledge dangerous enough to justify disappearance. He vanished first. Then the Carters. Because Rebecca knew too much. And Daniel had agreed to protect them all. The $50,000 suddenly made sense. Not payment. An incentive. Or a test. Blake pushed back from the desk and stood slowly. The argument in the alley replayed in his mind with brutal clarity. Lucas's anger. Emily's hesitation. They hadn't agreed because they wanted to. They had agreed because their parents told them there was no alternative. Blake pulled up Marcus Hale's file again. Dug deeper into his employment history. There it was. A private security contractor with international ties. Shell companies. Legal gray zones. The kind of organization that didn't threaten. It resolved. Blake felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't witness protection. It was privatized erasure. He imagined the meeting, the offer laid out cleanly, calmly. Disappear together. New identities. No contact. No questions. Or risk exposure, retaliation, and consequences no courtroom could contain. Rebecca had chosen silence over justice. And now the silence had consumed them. At 4:07 a.m., Blake received a call. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "You're closer than you think," a man said. Calm. Polite. Familiar. Blake's spine stiffened. "Who is this?" A pause. "You've seen the footage." Blake said nothing. "We kept our word," the voice continued. "No harm came to them." "You don't get to decide that," Blake replied. Another pause, longer this time. "You think this ends with arrests," the man said. "It doesn't. It ends with balance." The line went dead. Blake stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding. They knew he knew. And they weren't afraid. Because the Carters were alive. But unreachable. Legally untouchable unless Blake could prove coercion, something that left no fingerprints and no bruises. He looked again at Rebecca's unsent email. "I need you to trust me." She hadn't been asking her family to trust a stranger. She had been asking them to trust her decision to bury the truth. Blake closed the file. The case hadn't just become controversial. It had become dangerous. Because the Carters hadn't vanished to escape punishment. They had vanished to prevent a much larger secret from coming into the light. And someone powerful was making sure it stayed buried. By the seventh day, Detective Aaron Blake stopped pretending this case was still his. It was bigger now, larger than jurisdiction, larger than procedure. Larger than truth. The call from the unknown man replayed in his mind like a bruise he kept pressing just to confirm it was still there. "You're closer than you think." Not a threat. A reminder. The kind meant to make a man doubt where the line between hunter and hunted truly sat. Blake knew one thing for certain: someone was watching him. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. A car idling too long across from his apartment. A hang-up call on his desk phone at precisely 9:12 p.m. 3 nights in a row. An internal database access log showing his credentials had been used while he was asleep. Someone wanted him aware, but not alarmed. That was the most unsettling part. Blake requested a quiet audit of internal access points. Off the record. Only 2 names surfaced with clearance high enough to move unnoticed through the system. One of them made his stomach drop. Deputy Commissioner Harold Keene. Keene wasn't just senior leadership, he was untouchable. 30 years on the force. Decorated. Trusted. A man whose signature could make investigations disappear or appear with equal ease. Blake stared at the name for a long time. It explained too much. Why the case had been allowed to continue, but never escalate. Why no warrants had been approved for deeper financial subpoenas. Why the CCTV footage had been quietly classified before it could leak. Blake leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Balance, the caller had said. Keene had built his career on balance. Public safety paired neatly with private favors. Order maintained by discretion. Blake's phone vibrated. A message from Morales: "We need to talk. In person. Now." They met in a diner 2 neighborhoods away, one of the last places left where conversations still drowned beneath clinking plates and low music. Morales slid into the booth, eyes scanning reflexively. "I checked the audit," Morales said without preamble. "Someone flagged your activity as high risk." Blake's jaw tightened. "Keene." Morales didn't argue. "There's more," Morales continued. "The Shell consulting firm? The $50,000 wasn't the first transfer. It was the first visible one." Blake leaned forward. "Meaning?" "Meaning there were others, years ago. Smaller. Spread out. Connected to unrelated cases." Blake's breath slowed. "Disappearances?" Morales nodded. "Not always families. Sometimes individuals. Sometimes witnesses. Sometimes, problems." Blake felt the world tilt. "This isn't protection," he said quietly. "It's curation." Morales hesitated. "If you push this, you won't win." "I'm not trying to win," Blake replied. "I'm trying to stop pretending this is normal." Morales studied him carefully. "Then you need to understand something. The Carters weren't the first. They just made the mistake of loving each other enough to go together." That sentence followed Blake all the way home. Loving each other enough to go together. Rebecca's face flashed in his mind again, the moment she looked back at the house. She hadn't been mourning a home. She'd been measuring the cost of refusing. Blake returned to the precinct after midnight, moving quietly. He accessed one last file, Marcus Hale's employment history. This time, he didn't look for crimes. He looked for connections. Names repeated. Keene's name appeared once, buried in an old advisory capacity role for a private-public partnership. Legal. Approved. Sanitized. Blake's hands curled into fists. This wasn't a conspiracy in the dark. It was a system in the light. At 1:37 a.m., Blake received another call. Same voice. "You don't sleep much," the man said mildly. Blake didn't bother asking how he knew. "You're standing at a line," the voice continued. "And you're considering stepping over it." "You took a family," Blake said. "You don't get to talk about lines." A pause. "They're alive," the man said. "Safe. Educated. Employed. Invisible. Against their will. Against the alternative." Blake closed his eyes. "What happens if I keep digging?" he asked. The answer came without hesitation. "You'll become a variable." The line disconnected. Blake stared at the dark screen. He finally understood the true shape of the case. The Carters weren't victims in the traditional sense. They were proof of compliance. And he was being measured now. Not as a threat. As a potential problem. Blake shut down his terminal, grabbed his coat, and stepped into the cold New York night. The city watched him back with 1,000 unblinking eyes. And for the first time since the case began, Detective Aaron Blake wondered, not who had taken the family, but how many others had quietly agreed to disappear. And how close he was to joining them. The case ended on a Thursday. Not with arrests. Not with answers delivered at a press conference. It ended with a memo, 4 pages, stamped closed pending further evidence, written in language so careful it felt surgical. Detective Aaron Blake stared at the document long after the room had emptied. The official conclusion was simple: the Carter family left voluntarily. No evidence of coercion or criminal activity could be substantiated. It was clean. It was false. And it was final. Blake signed it anyway. He told himself it was strategy. That surviving the system mattered more than martyrdom. That there were ways to expose rot without being crushed by it. Still, his pen felt heavier than it ever had. Outside, reporters were already reframing the story. Headlines shifted from vanished family to secretive exit. Public sympathy fractured into suspicion, resentment, conspiracy. People needed someone to blame. The Carters weren't here to defend themselves. Blake packed his office slowly that evening. 32 years of service fit neatly into 2 cardboard boxes. He had submitted his retirement papers that morning, early, abrupt, irreversible. Keene hadn't tried to stop him. That was answer enough. At home, Blake poured a drink he didn't want and sat in the dark. The city hummed outside, alive and indifferent. Somewhere, for people were breathing under new names, learning new routines, erasing themselves one habit at a time. Were they safe? That question refused to behave. 3 weeks later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a burner phone and a folded piece of paper. One line. "You kept your balance." Blake crushed the phone in his hand. Balance. That word again. The lie people told themselves when they traded truth for order. He didn't activate the phone. He buried it in the bottom of a drawer, beneath old commendations and photos that now felt like artifacts from a different life. Months passed. The Carter house was sold. Renovated. A new family moved in. They repainted the walls. Replaced the locks. Laughed on the steps. The house learned new habits. But Blake hadn't forgotten the old ones. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year after the case closed, Blake sat in a cafe near Union Square, reading a paper he wasn't absorbing. That was when he saw her. Not Rebecca. Emily. He was certain. She stood across the street, umbrella tilted just enough to obscure her face. Older somehow. Harder. But the posture, the way she shifted her weight when waiting, unchanged. Their eyes met. Time folded in on itself. Emily didn't smile. She didn't wave. She shook her head, once. Small. Precise. A warning. Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Blake sat frozen, heart pounding, rain blurring the window between them. Alive. At a cost he could never measure. That night, Blake opened a new file on his personal laptop. No badge. No credentials. Just a name. The Invisible Network. He began writing, not accusations, not evidence, but patterns. Disappearances. Shell companies. The way cases died quietly when they brushed against certain boundaries. He wrote because memory was a form of resistance. He wrote because silence was how it all survived. He never published it. Not yet. Some truths needed patience. The Carter case remained closed. Officially. But in the corners of the internet, the story lived on, argued, dissected, distorted. People asked the same question over and over. Would you disappear to protect your family? Blake knew the answer wasn't simple. Because the real question was never whether the Carters vanished. It was whether they had ever truly been free to stay. And in a city of millions, where cameras watched everything in power moved unseen, Blake wondered how many lives were quietly edited out of existence. Not with violence, but with consent. And how long it would take before someone finally refused to disappear.